goes missing, those left behind often grapple with the fear of the worst outcomes. However, no one could have anticipated the grim reality surrounding Shannon Mills' disappearance. Her husband, Joshua, appeared to be the ideal partner, actively participating in the search, supporting the family, and urging everyone to maintain hope. Yet, what if this was merely a fade, concealing the true danger that had been lurking in plain sight? Shannon's remains were discovered just a few yards from the location where they had once envisioned their future together. How could someone who professed love and loyalty turn against the very individual they claimed to hold dear? What compels a person to make such a horrific decision? Furthermore, what if this was not merely a tragic accident, but rather a calculated act? Can one genuinely trust someone who professes love, or is there always an underlying threat behind such declarations? The evening of November 2014 marked a pivotal moment that disrupted the Metal family's existence. Shannon, a young actress from Alberta, had just secured a long-awaited role and opportunity she had tirelessly pursued. She intended to meet her brother, Brett, at the theater to celebrate this significant milestone. However, her seat remained unoccupied. Initially, Brett did not think much of her tardiness, assuming she was delayed by rehearsal or attending to last-minute details. As the night progressed and Shannon still failed to arrive, his unease began to escalate. He attempted to contact her repeatedly through calls, messages, and voicemails, but received no reply. As the hours slipped by, his anxiety intensified, leaving him with no choice but to return home, burdened by uncertainty and concern. The following morning, Brett's apprehension only grew. He intensified his efforts to reach his sister by calling her again, but her phone remained silent. In desperation, he reached out to their parents, hoping for any news, but they were equally perplexed. Shannon's mother attempted to soothe her worries with logical explanations, considering the possibility that Shannon had been caught up in a last-minute filming schedule change or was working a night shift, given the unpredictable nature of her acting career. She even reassured herself that Shannon might simply be asleep after a long night on set, unable to hear the phone ringing. However, deep down, none of these rationalizations seemed to resonate as the hours dragged on, and the family's anxiety escalated. They were on the verge of discovering a reality far more sinister than any of them could have anticipated. Even these explanations felt implausible. Shannon had always been responsible and made a point to stay connected, especially when new career opportunities were on the horizon. She would not have disregarded all the calls and messages. To alleviate her mounting anxiety, Shannon's mother left another voicemail, expressing that they were not upset about her absence but merely wanted to ensure her safety. Unfortunately, this message also went unanswered, intensifying the feeling that something was gravely amiss. Shortly thereafter, 6 members of Shannon's family, including her husband Joshua, arrived at the police station. They were aware that Shannon was supposed to travel from Edmonton to Calgary and feared she might have been involved in an accident. They implored the authorities to initiate a search, but the police responded with indifference, asserting that as an adult Shannon possessed the autonomy to go wherever she wished without notifying her family. However, her relatives continued to implore the authorities, stressing that Shannon had never been absent for such an extended period and that her disappearance was entirely out of character. After considerable persuasion and heartfelt discussions, the police ultimately consented to investigate local hospitals and initiate a search operation, yet no leads emerged. No hospital had reported any incidents involving Shannon. Days began to merge into an endless cycle of waiting and anxiety, leaving her family at a loss on how to manage the uncertainty and silence. During this period, Shannon refrained from using her credit cards, making any purchases, or appearing anywhere with her vehicle. It was as though she had completely vanished without a trace. What was particularly alarming was Shannon's total absence from social media. Typically, she was quite active on her blog, where she shared her achievements and challenges, providing updates on auditions and shoots. However, this time, there were no new posts or updates, only an eerie silence. This absence intensified the fear and uncertainty felt by her loved ones, who found themselves trapped in a state of limbo, sinking deeper into the shadows of the unknown. The waiting became intolerable. Each day without any communication from Shannon felt like an eternity. A few days following her disappearance, her husband Joshua unexpectedly notified the police that he had discovered her cell phone at home, tucked away in the pocket of a pair of pants in the bedroom. This revelation served as the first significant red flag, prompting detectives to question whether the situation was as straightforward as it initially appeared. Initially, it appeared that Joshua had uncovered significant information when he found Shannon's car parked a short distance from their residence. This information was promptly relayed to the authorities. However, for nearly 2 weeks, there were no indications of a violent crime or struggle. During this period, Shannon's family and friends endured a harrowing state of uncertainty, anxiously awaiting any updates. Then, 2 peculiar photographs emerged, reaching the investigators. These images, affixed to trees in a Calgary park, depicted a red-haired woman with her face obscured by her hair, causing widespread concern among those involved. The striking resemblance to Shannon could not be overlooked, leaving both the police and her family in shock. It appeared as though someone was intentionally toying with them, possibly a kidnapper or a disturbed individual seeking to mock their anguish. In response, authorities initiated a comprehensive search operation in Big Creek Park, one of Canada's largest natural reserves. Various teams were assembled, comprising not only law enforcement personnel but also volunteers. Among the searchers were Shannon's family members, including her husband Joshua, who remained hopeful of finding her alive. Search dogs, specially trained for such operations, were deployed, and a helicopter was utilized to survey the expansive area from above. For 2 days, the search teams meticulously scoured the park, examining every inch of ground in hopes of uncovering any clues that could lead them to Shannon, but all efforts proved fruitless. It was soon disclosed that the photographs, initially believed to be linked to the case, were unrelated. This situation was initially part of an art project developed by local college students. Upon realizing the unintended consequences of their work, the students approached the police to clarify the misunderstanding. This revelation dealt a devastating blow to Shannon's family and the investigators, who had hoped that the images would yield crucial leads. Once again, they found themselves with no new information, returning to the frustrating cycle of uncertainty and despair. Meanwhile, Shannon's parents and husband endured relentless anguish, anxiously awaiting news each day, trapped in a cycle of fear and sorrow. With each passing day, the situation became increasingly intolerable, and more questions arose. Would they find Shannon alive? If so, in what condition would she be? Most terrifying of all, how would they cope if they learned she was no longer alive? Although the theory of abduction seemed improbable, as no one had contacted the family for ransom, they did not entirely dismiss it. In their desperation, they clung to any potential explanation for her disappearance, even as they feared the worst. With each day that passed, the likelihood of finding Shannon alive appeared to diminish. Later, Joshua disclosed a troubling incident to the police, something he had kept to himself until that point. He recounted that a few months prior, Shannon had called him in distress, expressing a desire to jump off a bridge following yet another disappointing audition in which she had invested her hopes. Joshua remembered how close she had been to a breaking point that day, but he had managed to soothe her. Now, he couldn't help but wonder if those feelings were connected to her current situation. Old emotional wounds have been reopened as detectives took Joshua's account seriously and initiated searches of the bodies of water in and around the city. Given the presence of several large bridges in the vicinity, divers and search teams meticulously examined every river and lake in hopes of uncovering any clues. However, each day concluded in disappointment, yielding no signs, no traces, and no indications of Shannon's whereabouts. By May 2015, nearly 6 months had elapsed since Shannon's disappearance, yet the police remained without leads, witnesses, or evidence to illuminate her fate. Law enforcement officials began to dread the worst, suspecting that Shannon might no longer be alive, although they chose not to inform the family officially to prevent further anguish. The situation escalated to a critical juncture, prompting the assignment of seasoned detective Christine White to lead the investigation. With over a decade of experience in homicide cases, Christine was recognized for her unwavering determination and meticulous attention to detail. Her efforts had previously resulted in the incarceration of numerous dangerous criminals, and she was now prepared to confront this case. Christine opted to begin her inquiries with those closest to Shannon, understanding that in such situations, the perpetrator is often someone within the victim's inner circle. The first individual she chose to interview was Joshua, who appeared open and cooperative. He had collaborated with the police from the outset and had permitted them to search his home twice, consistently responding to their questions without hesitation. Joshua was also present when Shannon's family initially reported her missing. The police were informed of Shannon's disappearance, and Joshua maintained a close rapport with them. Shannon's family never wavered in their belief in his innocence. However, Christine began to notice subtle discrepancies in their accounts. This observation marked the commencement of a comprehensive investigation. On June 2, 2015, 7 months after Shannon vanished, Detective Christine White, accompanied by a team of officers, arrived at Joshua Burgess's residence, armed with a warrant to search the property, seize his phone, and impound Shannon's vehicle. This moment represented a pivotal shift in the investigation, and Christine sensed that crucial developments were imminent. However, when they knocked on the door, Joshua did not respond immediately. Instead, the detectives heard his muffled voice claiming he would be out shortly, which raised further suspicions. Christine felt an escalating urgency, suspecting that Joshua was attempting to conceal something or delay their entry. The officers insisted he open the door without delay, preventing him from taking the time to prepare. When Joshua finally opened the door, the detectives were prepared for any eventuality, even the use of force if necessary. To their surprise, Joshua stood before them in tears, confessing, "I'm the one who did it. I'm the one who ended Shannon's life." His expression was a blend of horror and despair, as if this admission was his final plea for some form of relief. To fully comprehend the events leading to this confession, it is essential to revisit the months preceding this moment. Shannon and Joshua had been married for only 7 months at the time of her disappearance, yet their relationship was already precarious. Following Shannon's vanishing, the investigation uncovered that the couple had an open marriage, a fact known even to her family. This arrangement was initiated by Joshua, who asserted that Shannon had consented to it. However, it did not bring her genuine happiness. While the concept of their marriage permitted both partners to engage in physical relationships with others, for Shannon, it was more of a compromise than a true desire. Investigators found that Joshua was actively involved with other women, and Shannon was aware of this situation. In fact, she had met some of his partners and, according to Joshua, did not object to the arrangement. However, the dynamics began to change when Shannon voiced her wish to revert to a more conventional relationship. She realized that she no longer wished to share her husband and issued him an ultimatum. Joshua agreed to her conditions, but his commitment was not entirely genuine. Shortly thereafter, Shannon noticed that Joshua had set a password on his phone, a change that raised her suspicions. Feeling uneasy, she requested access to his device. Although Joshua provided her with the password, her examination of his messages revealed that he was still involved with one of his former partners, despite their agreement. More troubling was the content of his texts with this woman, in which he discussed plans to divorce Shannon, expressing his intention to make this other woman his primary partner. This revelation left Shannon devastated, as she felt profoundly betrayed. Following the incident of throwing her phone, Shannon began contemplating her future actions. She resolved that a new beginning was essential and made plans to relocate from Calgary to Edmonton. At the time of her disappearance, she was already in the midst of this transition. Although she and Joshua were still cohabiting, they had organized their schedules to minimize interactions. Shannon performed as a stand-up comedian during the night, while Joshua worked during the day. Their relationship had become increasingly strained and distant. Detectives later uncovered that Shannon's last recorded activities ceased abruptly on November 27, 2014. This date marked the final instance of her engaging in any banking transactions, using her phone, or maintaining an online presence. The following morning, her phone's signal was traced to an alley in the city, after which Joshua claimed to have discovered it at their home. This assertion immediately aroused the suspicions of law enforcement. During subsequent interrogations, Joshua maintained that he had inadvertently found both Shannon's phone and car, yet he was unable to clarify the circumstances surrounding this discovery. His accounts became increasingly contradictory, prompting Detective Christine White to identify him as the primary suspect. The police sought to obtain warrants to seize Joshua's phone and Shannon's vehicle. However, at that juncture, there was insufficient evidence to secure the necessary legal permissions. Their prospects hinged on a judge's ruling regarding their requests. Once the warrants were finally approved, Christine and her team returned to Joshua's residence, fully aware that they had caught him unprepared and braced for any potential developments. Joshua initially attempted to conceal the evidence and even considered fleeing. However, when he finally opened the door, the situation took an unforeseen turn. Let us examine this pivotal moment more closely. Standing before the officers, Joshua, with tears streaming down his face, confessed to the crime. His voice quivered, and it appeared he was struggling to maintain his composure. Upon entering the house, Christine observed an army knife on the floor, and Joshua was found covered in blood. He had made an attempt to harm himself by cutting his neck, but fortunately, he had not severed any major arteries. Paramedics swiftly transported him to the hospital, where his life was stabilized. From his self-inflicted injuries, Joshua was referred for a psychiatric evaluation to assess whether he posed a danger to himself or others. Even at this stage, numerous questions remained unanswered regarding the events of that tragic night and the reasons behind his desperate actions. Consider the individual who seemed to be doing everything within his power to locate his missing wife, cooperating with the police, participating in search efforts, and displaying genuine concern for her family. Yet, what if he had been deceitful all along, concealing a horrifying reality? This narrative revolves around Joshua Burgess and Shannon Metal, where every action and gesture was part of a meticulously orchestrated plan to commit a heinous crime. When Joshua finally found himself in the interrogation room, his only words were, "If I could see Shannon again, I would tell her how much I love her." The police allowed him the night to gather his thoughts before resuming the questioning. During this interval, search teams with dogs began scouring his property. By morning, they had discovered Shannon's body buried beneath layers of debris and dirt in the backyard. The forensic team conducted an exhumation, uncovering sufficient evidence to charge him. However, the detectives sought to hear the complete truth directly from Joshua. On the second day of his arrest, a leading interrogation expert was brought in, and it was then that Joshua began to divulge information, following his initial confession. The discovery of Shannon's body was sufficient to warrant formal charges, as Joshua's account was essential for comprehending the events that transpired between him and Shannon, ultimately leading to the tragic outcome. The police understood that only through his confession could Shannon's family uncover the truth regarding her final moments. Joshua recounted that on that ill-fated day, he returned home to find Shannon seated on the couch, where she immediately accused him of infidelity, labeling him a traitor for his affairs. Her accusations were vehement, and she shouted at him. At one point, in an attempt to silence her, Joshua covered her mouth with his hand, but Shannon broke free, bit him, and continued to hurl insults, expressing her disgust at his touch. In a moment of rage, Joshua seized her by the neck and began to strangle her, not ceasing until she ceased to breathe. Upon realizing that Shannon was lifeless, he panicked and attempted to revive her. However, when those efforts failed, he could not bring himself to seek medical assistance. According to his confession, he was determined to keep the incident a secret. For 8 months, he lived with this deception, hiding Shannon's body near the house, initially in a container and later burying it in the backyard. Although the police had searched the residence twice before, they overlooked the concealed containers on the back porch, which Joshua had deliberately hidden under trash bags to evade suspicion. In his distorted reasoning, he chose that location for her burial because he could not bear the thought of his beloved leaving him, even in death. Ultimately, Shannon's family was horrified to learn the truth about her fate and the identity of her perpetrator. Their side had not only engaged in the search efforts but had also been misleading them throughout the entire ordeal. 2 years following these events, the trial commenced, attracting considerable media attention, with reporters meticulously tracking every development in the case. Initially, Joshua faced the possibility of life imprisonment for second-degree murder. He acknowledged his involvement in the crime, asserting that he had not intended to take Shannon's life, claiming it occurred in a moment of passion. Throughout the trial, his defense team advocated for the potential of parole after a mere 10 years, a notion that profoundly shocked Shannon's family, who believed his actions were entirely premeditated. Interrogations unveiled numerous details that helped reconstruct the tragic events surrounding Shannon's disappearance. An argument between her and Joshua escalated, and in an attempt to reconcile, Joshua suggested they engage in intimacy, to which Shannon declined. When he attempted to persuade her further, she expressed regret over their marriage, a comment that incited Joshua's fury. He then lunged at her, seized her by the throat, and began to strangle her. When he grew fatigued, he resorted to using a belt to complete the act. Upon realizing the gravity of his actions, Joshua fashioned a makeshift coffin from a plastic container, where he concealed Shannon's body in the backyard until spring, when the ground thawed, allowing him to bury her. Despite the cold conditions, Shannon's remains had significantly decomposed, and experts confirmed that the cause of death was strangulation, with no other injuries present to contradict this finding. Joshua's account, despite his confession, revealed his refusal to attend the court hearings, as he claimed he could not face Shannon's family. Her relatives perceived this as an indication of his cowardice in confronting them. Ultimately, the judge imposed a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 10 years. This decision incited outrage among Shannon's family, who believed that an individual guilty of such a heinous crime should not be afforded any opportunity for freedom. They contended that Joshua's lifestyle and deceit were significant factors leading to this tragedy and that he had consistently sought to evade responsibility. Recently, Joshua submitted a request for parole, prompting Shannon's family to prepare for the parole board hearing, where they intend to remind both the court and the public of the risks associated with releasing the individual responsible for her death. What are your thoughts on whether someone who has so profoundly deceived others and taken his wife's life should be granted a chance at freedom? Can regret and remorse truly alleviate the suffering he has caused?